In today's video, affordability of homes across property types in Canada and Toronto and more. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty. As always, back with another video for you guys here today. In today's video, we're going to talk about affordability, but quickly before we get into the topic of today's video, as always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you have. Once again, you can find my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. If you have any questions during this video or any other video, feel free to get in touch with me. Lastly, as a matter of order, I usually say feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. But as I always say, as some have pointed out, why do you say this? But you know, at this point, it's muscle memory. I always say it. You're not obliged to subscribe, you're not obliged to comment, you're not obliged to like. Feel free to do so if you want to. The fact that you take the time out of your day to watch these videos is compliment enough. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which is affordability across Toronto and Canada for freehold properties, condominiums, and the aggregate. What does that mean? Well, RBC just came out with a wonderful report. I'll link in the description so you can go check it out for yourself, where they claim, according to their metrics, the affordability measures that they have, affordability has gotten worse. In fact, it has moved up 2.7%, which is the highest in 3 decades. Now, what we're gonna do is first break down what is this affordability metric. They call it the aggregate affordability, what goes into it, how do they calculate it, and then we're gonna go through some charts explaining it. First and foremost, what is the affordability metric? They measure it as minimum home ownership costs as a percentage of the median salary or household income. To explain this a little bit more, and I'll put the chart up on the screen as I explain this means the higher the percentage, the less the affordable, right? So it's a inverse relationship. Basically, once again, the higher the percentage point we're looking at, the worse it is in terms of affordability, right? So with this first chart, we can see it's across Canada, and you have 3 main curves. You have curves that indicates freehold properties, single family properties. You have a curve that indicates condominiums, and then you have the aggregate. And the line of delineation in the middle, the dash line, is the long-term average, the running average. So as we can see from this chart, in the second quarter of 2021, there was an increase of 2.7%, where we hit the levels of 45%. So once again, that means 45% of minimum ownership costs make up median household income. And otherwise put, out of 100% of your median household income, 45% of that would be required for, once again, minimum ownership costs, which is a recent increase of 2.7% that has occurred in the second quarter of 2021. Just to repeat myself for clarity one more time. Now obviously that's just for the aggregate curve, the gray line, right? When we look at the yellow line, which once again indicates a single family, is much higher, and condominiums are much lower. Obviously the aggregate is in the middle, right? Because minimum ownership costs for condominium are less, it carries down the aggregate, and minimum ownership costs are more for freehold properties. It kind of carries up the aggregate, right? That's why the aggregate is kind of situated in the middle. But that 45% figure that I just referred to was, once again, with regards to the aggregate. When we look at the freehold curve, right? So we're just looking at freehold single family properties as indicated by that yellow line, we see that's 4 percentage points higher, almost 5 percentage points higher from the aggregate, when we're looking at 45%, right? Now we're looking at 49%. So put in other words, once again, out of the median household income, freehold properties on average across Canada require 49% of the household income for ownership of freehold and single family properties. On the flip side of things, once again, we look at condominiums. It's much lower percentage points. It's down to 32%. An increase in of itself, but of course, compared to the 49% figure we're talking about with single family properties and the aggregate, 45%. Here we see that on average across Canada, it takes 32% of your median household income to own a condominium unit and a condominium property. Now this 2.7% jump to 45 across all property types across Canada is the largest jump according according to this RBC report, in 3 decades. And one thing I want to bring your attention to, as you can see, right, when we look at January 2020 on this graph, right, it could be a little difficult to see because it goes all the way back to the 80s. So we're really looking at the latter ends of the graph here. As we can see, we saw a short dip, which once again, since there's an inverse relationship, this inverse relationship in terms of a short dip indicates more affordability. We saw a short dip after January 2020, which pretty much corresponds, give a month or two, with regards to the start of the worldwide events that we were dealing with and to this day are dealing with. But that dip was short-lived. And as you can see, a spike occurred there after the dip in terms of the percentage increase, once again, meaning less affordability. But in reality, that was a short-lived dip. And what we can see from the curve is after the dip, we have seen since then, up to this point, a sharp increase in this curve. And that's pretty much for freehold, the freehold curve as indicated by the yellowish green and the gray curve as the aggregate across all property types. The condominium curve did not see the same short-lived dip. The dip was a little longer lasting, and the increase, the climb back upwards has been a little slower in reality. That's because, as I have indicated on this channel for the past year and a half, the worldwide event really more so impacted condominiums, especially now we're going to speak about the city of Toronto, moving on to this graph, than it did freehold properties. And do not confuse, once again, these curves with prices. Prices never really dipped all that much. Of course they did for condominiums, but I'm saying for freehold properties, prices never really dipped. So even though we saw a dip in the curve, that's just a dip in affordability, meaning for a short time, properties made up less of a percentage of median household income than they did previously and ever since then. It was a dip in minimum ownership costs as a percentage of the household income, but don't once again confuse it with a dip in prices. Moving on to the same graph, but for the city of Toronto, we see things are actually much worse. Whereas across Canada, the aggregate measure for affordability jumped 2.7%. For the city of Toronto, the jump was more than 2.7%, it was more than 3%, it was upwards of 4%, wherein the aggregate now stands at 59%. Once again, to reiterate, it means it takes 59% of the median household income for minimum, once again, minimum home ownership in terms of costs and expenses. And actually the gap here between the condominiums and the freehold is much higher than we saw at the Canada-wide graph, right? Yet that does not mean that condominiums are more affordable in Toronto than they were in Canada. It just means that all the curves have basically shifted upwards, with the curve for freehold properties shifting even ever more so than the shift for condominiums. But much like the Canada-wide graph, once again, condominiums here are on a slow and steady increase because this is taking into account quarter by quarter. Sometimes on this channel, I go through things week by week basis, right? So we have to understand they're taking a look at things quarter by quarter. And in terms of methodology, this study, how they're calculating minimum ownership costs, they have now actually incorporated the lower interest rates, whereas before they did not. And they've now assumed 20% down for the calculation of minimum ownership costs, whereas before they were assuming 25%. So they have changed a couple of the criteria to reflect the interest rates and what most people are putting down, whereas now it's more so 20% as opposed to 25%. And they've changed the criteria in such a way where you would assume it would reflect positively on affordability, because 20% of a purchase price is always going to be less than 25%. And with the lower interest rates, obviously the expenses are going to be less. So you would assume you would see an improvement in affordability, whereas that's not the case. The affordability is becoming an issue even despite a universal assumption of 20%, which is 5% less than they used to do, and low interest rates, where they in previous times where they've published these reports, they were working with higher interest rates in previous quarters, right? Now interest rates are starting to increase a bit now, obviously at the time of recording of this video, things are starting to pick up a bit, especially at a lot of A lender institutions in terms of their fixed rates are actually increasing quite a bit right now. But that's besides the point. Anyways, let me know if you have any further questions about things covered in this video or in any other video. This is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and RE/MAX Realtron Realty. As always, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more during this week. As always, on Friday, we're going to have a weekly condo market update. I'm going to have more building condominium reviews, a lot more covering all the latest happenings and market activity in the Toronto/GTA real estate market. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned. Thank you.